The scream from the farmhouse carried across the wheat fields like the cry of a dying animal, and Grusha's hands stilled on the mortar she had been grinding herbs with, her pointed ears twitching toward the sound. She knew that particular timbre of desperation, had heard it too many times in her years as a shaman, the sound of someone watching death creep closer to someone they loved. Her clan would tell her to ignore it, to let the humans handle their own affairs, but her feet were already moving before her mind had fully decided, carrying her toward the weathered homestead at the edge of the valley where human farmland met orc hunting grounds. The door hung open, and she could see the silhouette of a man bent over a small bed inside, his broad shoulders shaking. Grusha paused at the threshold, her green fingers gripping the doorframe as she warred with herself. The last time she had helped a human, her mother had beaten her bloody and told her that mercy toward their kind was weakness. The clan had rules, ancient ones, and those rules said that humans were enemies, thieves who had taken their lands generation by generation, pushing the orcs further into the mountains and forests. But then, another cry came from inside, weaker this time, the voice of a child, and Grusha's resolve crumbled like dried clay. She stepped through the doorway, her leather boots silent on the wooden floor, and cleared her throat. The man spun around, his hand going to a knife at his belt, his eyes wide and red, rimmed with tears and exhaustion. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 25 winters, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and a face marked by sun and wind and now terrible fear. "Get out," he said, but there was no real force behind it, just the automatic response of someone who had been taught to fear her kind. "Your son is dying," Grusha said simply, gesturing to the small figure on the bed. She could see the fever from here, the way the child's skin glistened with sweat, the shallow, rapid breathing that meant lungs filling with fluid. "I can help." The man's jaw worked, his knuckles white around the knife handle. "You're an orc." "Yes, I'm also a shaman. Your healers. Have they come?" 3 days ago. Said there was nothing they could do. Lung fever, too advanced. His voice broke on the last word, and he looked back at the child, a boy of perhaps 7 or 8 years, his small face flushed and contorted, even in unconsciousness. Said to make him comfortable, to say goodbye. Grusha moved closer, and the man tensed but did not stop her as she knelt beside the bed. She placed her palm against the boy's forehead, feeling the unnatural heat there, then gently pressed her fingers against his throat, counting the too-fast pulse. The sickness had its claws deep in him, that much was clear, but there was still life here, still a chance if she acted quickly. "I can save him," she said quietly, "but it will require a ritual, one that my clan forbids." The man stared at her, hope and suspicion fighting across his features. "Why would they forbid healing?" "Because the ritual I must perform requires the shaman to bind part of their own life force to the patient. If he lives, I live. If he dies after the binding, I die with him. It creates a connection that cannot be severed except by death or by both parties living to see another full moon rise." Grusha met his eyes, her own dark gaze steady. "My people believe it is foolish to risk a shaman's life for anyone, much less for humans. They would exile me for even considering it. Likely kill me if they knew I had done it." "Then why?" The question was barely a whisper. Grusha was silent for a long moment, looking down at the child's face. "Because I became a shaman to preserve life, not to count the value of it by the color of skin or the shape of ears. Because this child has done nothing to deserve death. Because you are desperate enough to let an orc into your home, which means you love him beyond your fear. That is worth honoring." The man sank into a chair, his hands covering his face. When he spoke, his voice was muffled and thick with emotion. "His name is Thomas. His mother died bringing him into the world. He is all I have. If you can save him, I will owe you everything." "You will owe me nothing," Grusha said firmly. "But I need your permission to proceed, and I need your help. The ritual requires certain components, and I cannot leave him long enough to gather them all." "Anything. Tell me what you need." Over the next hour, as the sun climbed higher in the sky and Thomas's breathing grew more labored, Grusha sent the man, whose name she learned was Cade Anderson, to gather what she needed. Spring water from the creek that ran behind his property, sage that grew wild near the tree line, his own blood, freely given, pricked from his thumb into a clay bowl. While he fetched these things, she prepared the space, drawing symbols on the floor around the bed with charcoal and salt, ancient marks that her grandmother had taught her before she passed into the spirit world. Cade returned with the items, his hands shaking as he handed them over. Grusha mixed them with practiced efficiency, adding herbs from her own pouch, crushing and stirring until the mixture became a thick paste that smelled of earth and growing things. She painted it across Thomas's chest in 3 broad strokes, then did the same to her own, feeling the cool, wet touch of it against her skin. "You must leave the room now," she told Cade. "What comes next is not for others to witness. It is sacred to my people and dangerous. If something goes wrong, if the spirits reject the binding, there may be backlash. I do not want you caught in it. I am not leaving my son. You must. I cannot perform the ritual with you here. Your presence will disrupt the flow of energy." She stood, meeting his eyes, and her voice softened. "I understand your fear, but you have already chosen to trust me. Trust me in this as well. Wait outside. I will call for you when it is done." Cade looked between her and Thomas, his entire body radiating reluctance, but finally he nodded and moved toward the door. He paused at the threshold, looking back. "Grusha, that's your name, right?" "Yes." "Thank you. Whatever happens, thank you for trying." Then he was gone, and Grusha was alone with the dying child and the weight of what she was about to do. She knelt beside the bed again, placing her palms flat against the symbols she had drawn on Thomas's chest, and began to chant. The words were old, older than the mountains, passed down through generations of shamans who had used them to commune with the spirits that governed life and death. Her voice rose and fell in a rhythm that matched her heartbeat, and she felt the familiar tingle of power beginning to gather around her, drawn by her will and her intent. The air grew thick, heavy, and the light in the room took on a strange quality, as though she were seeing through water. Grusha's consciousness began to split, part of her still kneeling beside the bed, part of her rising into a space that existed between the mortal world and the realm of spirits. She could see Thomas's spirit now, a small flickering light that was being pulled toward darkness, toward the great void where all life eventually returned. "No," she thought fiercely, and reached out with her own spirit, her own essence, wrapping it around that small light like a shield. The darkness recoiled, but it was hungry, and it pressed in from all sides, testing her defenses. Grusha gritted her teeth, feeling the strain of holding it back, and began the second phase of the ritual. This was the forbidden part, the thing her clan would kill her for. She took a strand of her own life force, bright and green like new spring leaves, and began to weave it together with Thomas's dimming light. The connection formed slowly, painfully, each twist of the weave sending sharp jolts through her body. She could feel his fever now as though it were her own, the burning heat, the crushing weight on her chest that made each breath a struggle. Her hands shook and sweat ran down her face, but she did not stop. The spirits were watching. She could feel their presence, ancient beings who cared nothing for mortal concerns of clan or species, who saw only the audacity of what she was attempting. A shaman binding herself to a human child. It was unprecedented, unnatural. And yet, as she continued to weave their life forces together, she felt something shift. Not resistance, but curiosity, interest, and then, perhaps, approval. One of the spirits moved closer, a vast presence that made Grusha's borrowed body feel small and fragile. She did not look at it directly, knowing that to perceive such beings fully could break a mortal mind, but she felt it examining her work, felt it trace the binding she had created. And then it spoke, not in words but in pure meaning that resonated in her bones. "This is well done, little shaman. Your courage honors the old ways. I will grant your request." Power flooded through Grusha, not her own but borrowed from the spirit, and it flowed through the binding she had created, straight into Thomas. She felt the fever break, felt the fluid in his lungs begin to dissipate, felt his heart steady and strengthen. The darkness retreated, unable to claim him now that he was anchored to her life as well as his own. The binding solidified, becoming permanent, and Grusha gasped as she was suddenly back in her body, fully in the mortal world, collapsing forward across the bed. Her lungs burned and her head swam, but she could hear Thomas breathing, slow and deep and steady. She had done it. He would live. Cade burst through the door at the sound of her fall, his eyes wild, but he stopped short when he saw Thomas, saw the healthy color returning to the boy's cheeks, saw the peaceful expression on his face. "Is he?" Cade started, unable to finish. "He lives," Grusha managed, her voice hoarse. "The fever is broken, the sickness is purged. He will wake in a few hours, weak but whole." Cade made a sound that was half laugh and half sob, dropping to his knees beside the bed and gathering Thomas's small hand in both of his own. "He is warm but not burning. His breathing sounds clear. How did you—" He looked at Grusha, really looked at her, and his expression shifted to alarm. "You are bleeding." She touched her nose and her fingers came away red. The price of the ritual. Blood from the nose and ears, weakness in the limbs, a bone-deep exhaustion that would take days to fade. "It is normal. The cost of the working. I will recover. Let me help you. You can barely sit up." Cade moved to her side, offering his arm for support. Grusha wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain the distance that should exist between their kinds, but her body betrayed her, and she accepted his help, allowing him to guide her to the chair he had occupied earlier. Her legs felt like water, and dark spots danced at the edges of her vision. Cade disappeared briefly and returned with a wet cloth, gently cleaning the blood from her face with a tenderness that surprised her. "I will need to stay," she said quietly. "For the next month, until the full moon rises again, Thomas and I are bound. If I go too far from him, we will both feel pain. If either of us is injured, the other will share it. This is the nature of the ritual." Cade's hand stilled on her cheek. "A month. Yes, I am sorry. I know you did not bargain for an orc living in your home. I will try to stay out of your way, to make my presence as small as possible." "That is not what I—" Cade shook his head. "You saved my son's life. You are welcome to stay as long as needed. But what about your clan? You said they would exile you for this or kill you." "They will not know where I am. I live apart from them in the foothills. They will assume I am on a spirit quest or gathering rare herbs. I have done so before, disappeared for weeks at a time. As long as I return before the gathering at summer solstice, they will not question it." Grusha met his eyes, seeing the gratitude there, the lingering fear, and something else she could not quite name. "But I must ask you to keep my presence here secret. If other humans learn that an orc is staying in your home, there will be trouble. For both of us." "I have no neighbors close enough to notice," Cade said. "The nearest farm is half a day's walk. I will tell no one. You have my word." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound Thomas's steady breathing and the creak of the old house settling. Grusha felt her strength slowly returning, enough that she could sit without swaying, though her head still pounded and her bones ached. Cade busied himself cleaning up the remains of the ritual, carefully wiping away the symbols she had drawn, collecting the clay bowl and the herbs. He moved with the efficiency of someone accustomed to work, his hands calloused and strong. "You farm alone?" Grusha asked, more to break the silence than from real curiosity. "Yes, since my wife died. It has been 8 years now. Thomas was an infant. I have managed, but it has not been easy." Cade glanced at her, then away, as though uncertain how much to share. "The land is good, but it's a lot for one man to work. I grow wheat and keep chickens, a milk cow, enough to trade in town for what we cannot make ourselves." "And Thomas helps?" A smile crossed Cade's face, brief but genuine. "He tries. He's better with the animals than with the crops. Has a gentle way about him. The chickens follow him like he is their mother." The smile faded. "When he fell ill, I thought I was being punished. For some sin I did not know I had committed. The healers said it came on too fast, too strong, that sometimes children just sicken and there is no reason to it." "Sickness does not require sin," Grusha said firmly. "It is not punishment from the gods or spirits. It is simply part of the world, like storms or droughts. We fight it when we can, endure it when we cannot." Cade nodded slowly, turning the clay bowl over in his hands. "Your people, do they have healers? Or are shamans the only ones who tend the sick?" "We have healers, yes. They know herbs and poultices, how to set broken bones and stitch wounds, but shamans work with spirit as much as body. We address ailments that come from curses or soul loss or imbalance with the natural world. The ritual I performed was shamanic work, not healing in the way you would understand it." And you learned this from your family? Grusha hesitated, old pain flickering through her. From my grandmother. She was clan shaman before me. My mother has no gift for it, though she tried to force herself into the role after my grandmother died. She lacks the sensitivity to the spirits, the willingness to sacrifice that true shamanic work requires. I inherited my grandmother's abilities, and that has caused tension. My mother sees it as a rebuke, evidence of her own failure. She has never forgiven me for being what she could not be. That must be difficult. It is the way of things. Grusha shifted in the chair, adjusting her position as a wave of dizziness passed. What of you? Your family? Dead. My parents, my 2 sisters. Plague swept through our village when I was 16. I survived because I was in the fields when it struck, did not return until it was over. After, I could not stay. Too many ghosts. I traveled west and found this land unclaimed, built the house and barn with my own hands, met my wife at a market town, brought her here. We had 3 good years before Thomas came, and she left this world. His voice was matter-of-fact, but Grusha heard the weight beneath it, the losses he carried. You have known much death for one so young. Is that not true of everyone? Cade set the bowl aside and stood, moving to the window to look out over his fields. The world is hard. We endure or we do not. I choose to endure, for Thomas's sake, if not my own. Grusha studied his profile, the set of his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the windowsill. There was strength in him, the kind that came not from never being broken, but from finding ways to mend. It was a quality she respected, something she saw too rarely in her own clan, where strength was measured in combat prowess and dominance, rather than resilience and quiet determination. Thomas stirred on the bed, making a small sound, and both adults moved to him instantly. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused, and he looked between Cade and Grusha with the disorientation of someone waking from a long sleep. "Papa," he whispered. "I am here, son, right here." Cade took Thomas's hand, his voice thick with emotion. "How do you feel?" "Tired, thirsty. Was I sick?" "Very sick, but you are better now. This is Grusha. She is a healer. She helped you." Thomas's gaze settled on Grusha, and she saw his eyes widen slightly as he took in her green skin, her tusks, her pointed ears. But there was no fear in his expression, only curiosity and a child's simple gratitude. "Thank you," he said solemnly. "You are welcome, Thomas. You were very brave." Grusha found herself smiling despite her exhaustion, something about the boy's earnest expression warming a part of her she had not realized was cold. "Are you going to stay? You look tired, too." "I will be staying for a while, yes. The magic I used to help you requires that we remain close to each other for a time. Is that acceptable to you?" Thomas nodded, then looked at his father. "Can she stay in my room, so I do not get scared in the night?" Cade looked uncertain. "Grusha might prefer her own space, Thomas. We could set up the spare room for her." "It is fine," Grusha said. "If it would comfort the boy, I can sleep here. I am not unused to sharing space." "Are you certain?" "Yes, it will make monitoring his recovery easier as well." She did not add that the idea of being alone in a strange house, surrounded by human things and human smells, made her more uncomfortable than she wanted to admit. At least with Thomas here, she would have a purpose, a focus. Cade nodded slowly. "Then we should get you both something to eat. You must be starving, Thomas." "I do not think I can eat," Thomas said, but his stomach betrayed him with a loud gurgle, and all 3 of them laughed, breaking the tension that had filled the room. The next hours passed in a strange domestic rhythm. Cade prepared a simple meal of broth and bread, which Thomas managed to keep down, and Grusha forced herself to eat despite her lack of appetite, knowing she needed strength to finish healing from the ritual. As evening approached, Cade set up a bedroll on the floor beside Thomas's bed, insisting that Grusha take it while he slept in his own room down the hall. "I am used to sleeping on the ground," Grusha protested. "You need not give up your comforts for me." "It is hardly a comfort, just an old blanket and some furs, please. It is the least I can do." She accepted because she truly was too exhausted to argue further, and because the bedroll looked infinitely more appealing than the hard wooden floor. As the sun set and the house fell into darkness, lit only by a single candle that Cade left burning on the bedside table, Grusha settled onto her makeshift bed and listened to Thomas's breathing slow and deepen as he fell back to sleep. Her own eyes grew heavy, and she let herself drift, trusting that for tonight at least they were safe. She woke to the sound of screaming. Grusha was on her feet before her mind fully registered that she had moved, her hand going to the knife at her belt even as she oriented herself to the source of the sound. Thomas was sitting up in bed, his small body rigid, his eyes wide and unseeing, a nightmare. Cade burst through the door at the same moment, nearly colliding with her, and together they went to the boy. "Thomas, you are safe. You are home. Wake up, son." Cade's voice was gentle but firm, and he placed his hands on Thomas's shoulders, grounding him. The boy blinked, gasped, and then burst into tears, throwing his arms around his father's neck. "I dreamed I was falling," Thomas sobbed, "into darkness, and I could not find you. I am here. I'm always here." Cade held him close, rocking slightly, and looked at Grusha over Thomas's head with an expression that mixed apology and helplessness. Grusha knelt beside the bed, reaching out slowly to touch Thomas's back. She let a small thread of her energy flow into him, soothing, calming, and she felt the moment his panic began to ebb. "The darkness cannot take you now," she said softly. "You are bound to me, and I am here. Feel it, the connection between us. You are not alone, even in your dreams." Thomas pulled back from Cade enough to look at her, his tear-streaked face confused. "I can feel it, like a warmth. Right here." He pressed his hand to his chest. "Yo, re." "Yes, that is the binding. It will keep you safe until the full moon rises and the ritual completes. You need not fear the darkness anymore." The boy seemed to consider this, then nodded and settled back into the bed, though he kept one hand wrapped around Cade's fingers. "Will you tell me a story? Papa tells me stories when I have nightmares, but I want to hear an orc story." Grusha blinked, surprised. "An orc story?" "Yes. Papa's stories are all about brave knights and dragons. I want to hear about orcs. Are there orc heroes?" "Thomas, it is late. Grusha needs her rest." Cade's voice was gentle but firm. "I do not mind," Grusha found herself saying. She settled into a more comfortable position, cross-legged beside the bed, and searched her memory for a tale suitable for a human child. "Very well. I will tell you the story of Vorgath the Wise, who learned to speak to the stones." Thomas's eyes lit up, and even Cade seemed interested, though he tried to hide it. Grusha began to speak, letting the old words flow, telling the tale of an orc shaman from ancient times who had been mocked for claiming that the mountains themselves could speak. Vorgath had spent years in meditation, learning the slow, patient language of stone, and when a great earthquake threatened to destroy his village, he was able to hear the warning from the mountains themselves and led his people to safety. The mockers learned humility, and Vorgath taught that wisdom could come from the most unexpected sources. By the time she finished, Thomas was asleep again, his breathing even and peaceful. Cade carefully extracted his hand from his son's grip and gestured for Grusha to follow him out of the room. In the hallway, lit by the pale moonlight coming through a window, he spoke in a low voice. "That was kind of you. You did not have to do that. It was no hardship. The old stories should be told. It keeps them alive." Grusha paused, then added, "Your son is brave. He accepted my presence without fear. That's unusual for a human child. Thomas has a gift for seeing the good in others, even when I cannot." Cade rubbed his face tiredly. "I will admit, when you first appeared in my doorway, I wanted to drive you away. Everything I've been taught said you were dangerous, monstrous, but you have shown me only kindness and skill. It shames me how quick I was to judge. You were protecting your son. There is no shame in that, and your people's fear of mine is not without cause. We have been at war on and off for generations. Trust must be earned on both sides." Grusha met his eyes in the dim light. "I should return to Thomas. The binding is strong, but nightmares can be persistent after a near-death experience. He may wake again." "Of course. And Grusha, thank you for everything." She nodded and slipped back into Thomas's room, settling once more onto the bedroll. Sleep came more slowly this time, her mind turning over the strangeness of her situation. She was in a human house, protecting a human child, speaking with a human man as though they were equals rather than enemies. Her clan would call it treason, her mother would call it weakness. But as she listened to Thomas's steady breathing and felt the binding between them pulse with healthy life, Grusha could not bring herself to regret her choice. The days that followed fell into an unexpected pattern. Thomas recovered his strength quickly, as children often did, and within a week he was up and moving around the house, eager to return to his normal routines. Cade would not allow him to work in the fields yet, but he could help with small tasks, feeding the chickens and collecting eggs, churning butter, shelling peas. And wherever Thomas went, Grusha followed, bound by magic and growing fondness to keep him in sight. She learned the rhythm of their lives, the way Cade woke before dawn to tend the animals before the heat of the day, the way Thomas liked to sit by the window in the afternoon and watch the clouds, the way they ate their evening meal together and spoke of simple things, plans for the next day's work and observations about the weather. It was so different from clan life, where meals were communal and loud, where privacy was scarce and competition constant. There was a peace here, a gentleness that Grusha had not known existed. Cade began to teach her about farming, perhaps sensing that she needed occupation for her hands and mind. She learned to tell the difference between wheat ready for harvest and wheat that needed more time, learned the art of collecting eggs without disturbing the hens, learned how to milk the cow that Cade called Bess, and who seemed entirely unbothered by Grusha's orcish appearance. In turn, she taught Thomas about herbs and their uses, showing him how to identify medicinal plants from poisonous ones, how to prepare simple remedies for common ailments. "Why did you become a shaman?" Thomas asked one afternoon as they sat in the garden behind the house, sorting through bundles of dried herbs. "I did not choose it exactly. It chose me. When I was your age, perhaps a little older, I began to see things that others could not. Spirits in the forest, patterns of energy in the earth. My grandmother recognized the signs and began to train me. It was hard work, learning to control the gift to channel it properly. But it also felt right, like I had found the thing I was meant to do." Grusha selected a sprig of lavender and handed it to Thomas. "What do you want to be when you are grown?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, considering. "I want to be like Papa, strong and kind. He takes care of me in the farm all by himself. That seems very brave to me." "It is. Your father is a good man. Do you like him?" The question caught Grusha off guard, and she found herself fumbling for an answer. "I respect him, yes. He has shown me hospitality and trust when he had no reason to do so." "But do you like him?" Thomas persisted with a child's relentless logic. "Like, do you think he is nice?" "I think he is very nice. Yes." Thomas grinned, clearly pleased with this answer, and returned his attention to the herbs. Grusha tried to ignore the small flutter in her chest, the way her mind wanted to linger on thoughts of Cade, the sound of his laugh when Thomas said something clever, the way he moved through the world with quiet confidence, the rare moments when he smiled fully and his whole face transformed. It was dangerous territory, these thoughts. She was orc, and he was human, and beyond that, she would be leaving when the moon turned full. There was no point in allowing her feelings to grow into something more complicated, but feelings, she was learning, did not listen to logic. It happened on a hot afternoon 2 weeks into her stay, when the binding had become so familiar that she barely noticed its presence anymore. Cade was working in the far field, harvesting the first of the wheat, and Grusha had taken Thomas down to the creek to cool off and gather fresh watercress for the evening meal. The boy was wading in the shallows, his trousers rolled up to his knees, laughing as minnows darted around his feet. Grusha sat on the bank, her own feet in the water, letting the current wash away the dust and heat of the day. She had let her guard down, lulled by the peaceful afternoon, and so she did not sense the danger until it was almost too late. The boar came crashing out of the underbrush on the far side of the creek, massive and angry and charging straight toward Thomas. Grusha moved on instinct, throwing herself into the water and scooping the boy up with one arm while reaching for her knife with the other. She shoved Thomas toward the bank, yelling for him to run, and turned to face the boar as it plunged into the creek after them. The animal was enormous, easily 300 pounds of muscle and fury, its tusks yellowed and sharp. Grusha had fought boars before, but never in water, never while protecting a child. She dodged the first charge, feeling the wind of its passage, and slashed with her knife, opening a cut along its shoulder. The boar squealed and wheeled around, eyes mad with pain and rage. It charged again, and this time Grusha was not quite fast enough. The boar's shoulder slammed into her hip, sending her sprawling into the water. Her knife flew from her hand, lost in the current, and she felt the animal's weight bearing down on her, felt the tusks seeking her throat. She grabbed them with both hands, holding the boar's snout away from her face, her arms shaking with the effort. And then Thomas was there, screaming and hitting the boar with a large stick he had grabbed from the bank. It was a child's attack, ineffective in terms of damage, but it was enough to distract the animal. The boar's head swung toward this new threat, and in that moment of inattention, Grusha heaved with all her strength, rolling the animal off her and scrambling for her lost knife. Her fingers closed around the hilt just as the boar charged Thomas, and she threw herself between them, driving the blade up under the boar's jaw and into its brain. The animal collapsed, dead before it hit the ground, its weight pinning Grusha's legs to the rocky creek bed. "Thomas, are you hurt?" she gasped, shoving at the boar's bulk. No, I'm fine. Are you?" The boy's voice was shaking but steady, and he helped her push the dead animal aside. Grusha took inventory. Her hip was bruised, her arms ached, and she had several shallow cuts from the creek rocks, but nothing serious. "I am well. We need to get back to the house and tell your father what happened. This meat should not go to waste, and he will need help hauling it back." They made their way up the bank, both of them dripping wet and shaking from the adrenaline, and found Cade already running toward them, drawn by the sound of the fight. His face went pale when he saw the blood, saw the dead boar in the creek, saw Grusha's torn clothes. "What happened?" I heard screaming. He dropped to his knees in front of Thomas, checking him over with swift efficiency. "A boar attacked. Grusha saved me. She killed it." Thomas pointed at the creek, his voice full of awe. Cade's eyes moved to Grusha, and she saw fear there, and gratitude, and something else she could not name. "Are you hurt?" "Bruised. Nothing more. I have survived worse. Come to the house. Let me look at you properly." He stood, scooping Thomas into his arms, despite the boy's protests that he was too old to be carried, and gestured for Grusha to follow. Back at the house, Cade insisted on tending to Grusha's injuries himself, washing the cuts with clean water and applying a salve he had made from herbs she recognized as her own teaching. His hands were gentle but thorough, and Grusha found herself intensely aware of his touch, the way his fingers lingered perhaps a moment longer than necessary, the furrow of concentration between his brows. "You could have been killed," he said quietly, binding a bandage around her arm where the deepest cut had been. "But I was not, and neither was Thomas. That is what matters. You did not hesitate. You put yourself between him and the boar without thought for your own safety." Cade tied off the bandage and sat back, his eyes searching her face. "Why? You could let the binding break, could go back to your people and tell them the human boy died despite your efforts. No one would blame you." Grusha was silent for a long moment, considering her answer. "I could not. Even if there were no binding, I could not. Thomas is under my protection now. That's not something I take lightly. Because he is a patient, a responsibility. Because he is important to you." The words were out before Grusha could stop them, and she saw Cade's expression shift, surprise and something warmer flickering across his features. "Grusha, he trailed off, seeming to struggle with what he wanted to say. "You do not have to say anything. I know the situation is complicated. I know I will be leaving in 2 weeks when the moon turns. I know that anything between us is impossible for 100 different reasons." Grusha stood, needing distance, needing air. "I should check on Thomas, make sure he's not going into delayed shock from the attack." She fled before Cade could respond, her heart pounding and her thoughts in chaos. What was she doing? She could not have feelings for this human, could not let herself imagine a future that included him and his son and this peaceful farm. She was Orc. He was human. Her clan would never accept it. His people would never accept it. The best she could hope for was to complete the ritual, see Thomas safely healed, and return to her solitary life in the foothills before she did something truly foolish. But that night, as she lay on her bedroll listening to Thomas sleep and replaying the look in Cade's eyes when he had bandaged her wounds, Grusha admitted to herself that it was already too late. Foolish or not, impossible or not, she had fallen for the quiet farmer and his brave son, and she had no idea what to do about it. The next week passed in a blur of tension and unspoken words. Cade butchered the boar, and they feasted on fresh pork, smoking and salting the rest to preserve it. Thomas recovered from his fright and declared the whole incident a grand adventure, pestering Grusha to tell the story again and again, embellishing it each time until she had slain a boar the size of a bear with her bare hands. She humored him, grateful for the distraction, and tried not to notice the way Cade watched her when he thought she was not looking. They were running out of time. The moon was waxing, growing fuller each night, and soon the ritual would complete and the binding would dissolve. Grusha should have been relieved. Instead, she felt a growing dread, a weight in her chest that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with the thought of leaving this place, these people who had become so dear to her in such a short time. 5 days before the full moon, Thomas brought it up at dinner. "What will happen when you leave?" he asked Grusha, pushing peas around his plate. "Will we ever see you again?" Grusha set down her spoon carefully. "I do not know. My clan will expect me to return to my duties, and it is not safe for me to be seen here. If your neighbors discover an orc has been living with you, there could be trouble." "We do not have neighbors close enough to see," Thomas protested, "and I do not care what people think. You are my friend." "Thomas," Cade's voice was gentle but firm, "Grusha has her own life, her own people. We cannot ask her to give that up." "Why not? She could stay here. We have room, and she knows about herbs and healing. People from town could come here for help instead of going all the way to the city for a healer." "It is not that simple." "Son." "Why? Because she is an orc? That is stupid. She's nice and smart and she saved my life. Who cares what color her skin is?" Grusha felt her throat tighten at the boy's passionate defense, and she reached across the table to touch his hand. "I care that you think so highly of me, Thomas, truly. But your father is right. The world is not ready for an orc and a human to live together openly. My people would see it as betrayal. Your people would see it as perversion. We would both be in danger." "Then we will not tell anyone. You could stay here on the farm. No one comes here except the traders, and only twice a year. Please, Grusha, I do not want you to go." She looked at Cade, desperate for him to say something, to support her position, but he was staring at his plate, his jaw tight. "Cade, what do you want me to say?" He looked up, and she saw anguish in his eyes. "That I agree with my son? That I do not want you to leave either? That the thought of this house going back to the way it was before you came fills me with a loneliness I have not felt since my wife died?" "I cannot say those things, Grusha. It would not be fair to you." "Why not fair to me?" "Because you deserve a life with your own people. A chance to find an orc partner, to have children if you wish them, to practice your shamanic arts freely." "What can I offer you?" "A hard-scrabble farm in the middle of nowhere. A human child who is not yours. A man who cannot even keep his own son healthy without outside help. You would be giving up everything for nothing." Grusha stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You think so little of yourself? Of what you have built here? I have seen how you live, Cade. You have created a home, a life of peace and purpose. You have raised a son who is kind and brave and open-hearted, who sees people for what they are rather than what they look like. You do all this alone, without complaint, with grace. That is not nothing." "And you?" Cade stood as well, his hands braced on the table. "What about what you want?" "Setting aside my unworthiness, setting aside the danger, what do you want, Grusha?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Grusha felt Thomas's eyes on her, felt the weight of the moment, and knew that her answer would change everything. She could lie, could say she wanted to return to her clan, to her solitary life. It would be easier, safer. Or she could tell the truth and damn the consequences. "I want to stay," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to wake up in this house every morning. I want to teach Thomas more about herbs and spirits. I want to help you with the harvest and learn more about farming. I want to hear your laugh and see your smile. I want a life I did not know was possible until I walked through your door and found a dying child and a desperate father and decided to break every rule I had ever been taught." Cade circled the table in 3 long strides, and then his hands were cupping her face, his forehead pressing against hers. "Then stay. Damn what anyone thinks. Damn the danger. Stay. It will not be easy. Nothing worth having is. My clan will come looking for me eventually. Then we will face them together. Your people will call you traitor, pervert, orc lover. I do not care. Let them talk. We will be too far out here to hear them anyway." Cade pulled back enough to meet her eyes, his thumbs tracing the line of her tusks with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "Say yes, Grusha. Stay with us." She kissed him. It was awkward at first, their anatomies slightly different, her tusks requiring adjustment, but they found a rhythm quickly, and Grusha felt the last of her resistance crumble. This was right. Dangerous and complicated and probably doomed, but right. She had spent so much of her life following rules, meeting expectations, being what her clan needed her to be. For once, she wanted to choose for herself. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas was grinning so wide his face looked like it might split. "Does this mean Grusha is staying?" "If she will have us," Cade said, not taking his eyes off her. "Yes," Grusha said, and felt something in her chest unfurl, a lightness she had not known she was capable of feeling. "Yes, I will stay." The next 5 days were a blur of planning and adjustment. They discussed practical matters, where Grusha would sleep now that she no longer needed to be in Thomas's room, though she ended up in Cade's bed more often than not, learning the contours of his body, the sounds he made when she touched him in certain ways, the way he held her afterward like she was something precious. They talked about how to handle traders and the rare visitors, deciding that Grusha would simply keep out of sight during those times, retreating to the forest if necessary. But mostly, they simply lived. Grusha helped Cade finish the wheat harvest, learning to swing a scythe with efficiency if not grace. She tended the garden and dried herbs for the winter. She continued teaching Thomas, expanding his lessons to include more advanced topics like spirit sight and energy manipulation, discovering that the boy had a small gift of his own, a sensitivity to the life force of plants and animals. The night of the full moon arrived clear and bright, the sky scattered with stars. Grusha led Cade and Thomas to a small clearing in the forest behind the farm, a place where the veil between worlds felt thin, and prepared for the final part of the ritual. This one was simpler than the first, requiring only that she and Thomas stand in moonlight and allow the binding to dissolve naturally, released by the same spirits that had sanctioned it. "Will it hurt?" Thomas asked, gripping her hand tightly. "No. You may feel a brief sense of loss, the absence of the connection, but it will pass quickly. You are fully healed now. The binding has served its purpose." Grusha knelt so she was at eye level with the boy. "You are brave and strong, Thomas. You do not need me to protect you anymore. But you will still be here, right? This is not goodbye? This is not goodbye. I am staying, remember? I will still be here when you wake tomorrow and the day after and the day after that." Thomas hugged her fiercely, and Grusha felt her eyes burn with unexpected tears. Over his shoulder she met Cade's gaze, saw her own emotion reflected there, and knew she had made the right choice. The moon rose to its zenith, and Grusha felt the binding begin to dissolve, the threads that connected her life force to Thomas's unraveling gently, painlessly. She whispered words of gratitude to the spirits that had aided her, felt their acknowledgement, and then the last thread snapped and it was done. Thomas gasped softly, swaying, and Cade caught him, steadying him. "Are you well?" Cade asked. "I feel different. Lighter, but not bad." Thomas looked at Grusha. "I can still feel that you care about me. That is not gone. No, little one, that is not gone. That will never be gone." They walked back to the house together, and that night Grusha slept in Cade's arms, truly free for the first time in her life. No binding to maintain, no clan to answer to, no rules to follow except the ones they made together. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The peaceful days that followed felt like a gift, each one precious and fragile. Grusha fell into the rhythms of the farm completely now, working alongside Cade from dawn to dusk, collapsing into bed exhausted and satisfied. Thomas thrived under their joint care, growing stronger and more confident, his gift for communicating with animals blossoming under Grusha's tutelage. But peace, Grusha had learned, was never permanent. The first traders of the season arrived on a crisp autumn morning, their wagon laden with goods from the distant city. Grusha retreated to the forest as planned, taking Thomas with her on the pretense of gathering mushrooms, while Cade handled the trade. They watched from the tree line as he exchanged wheat and smoked pork for sugar, salt, and cloth, as he chatted amiably with the traders, giving no sign that anything in his life had changed. The traders left by midday, and Grusha breathed a sigh of relief. They had passed the first test. Perhaps this could work after all. That night, she woke to the sound of drums in the distance, orc drums, the deep rhythmic beat that signaled a gathering of clans. Her blood ran cold. It was too early for the summer solstice gathering, too late for the autumn hunt. This was something else, something urgent. Cade woke at her movement, his hand finding hers in the darkness. What is it? My people. They are gathering. I do not know why. Grusha sat up, straining to hear more, but the drums were far away, barely audible. I should go, see what is happening. If it is a war council, if they are planning to raid human settlements, you need to know. It could be a trap. If they have discovered where you have been, they could be drawing you out. I will be careful. But I have to know, Cade. If there is going to be violence, we need to prepare. He did not like it, she could tell, but he nodded. Then I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. You are human. They would kill you on sight. And I'm supposed to just let you walk into potential danger alone. You are supposed to trust that I can handle myself. Grusha cupped his face, kissing him softly. I'm a shaman, remember? I have ways of going unseen, of listening without being heard. I will return by dawn. If I am not back by noon, take Thomas and ride to the nearest town. Tell them orcs are massing and they need to prepare defenses. She left before he could argue further, slipping into the forest with the ease of long practice. The drums grew louder as she approached the foothills, and she could see the glow of fires ahead, far more than usual for a normal gathering. Her stomach churned with dread. Grusha used every trick her grandmother had taught her, cloaking herself in shadows, masking her scent, moving with the silence of falling snow. She crept close enough to the gathering to see what was happening, and what she saw made her heart sink. Every clan in the region was represented, hundreds of orcs gathered around a massive bonfire. And in the center, standing on a raised platform, was her mother, Razka, her face painted with the marks of war. Grusha inched closer, finding a hiding spot behind a fallen log, and listened. The humans grow bolder, Razka was saying, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd. They encroach on our hunting grounds. They cut down our sacred groves. They treat us as animals to be driven before them. And now they have stolen one of our own. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, anger and confusion mixing. Grusha's blood ran cold. They knew. Somehow they knew. My daughter, the shaman Grusha, has been taken by humans. She disappeared a month ago, and our scouts have tracked her to a human farm at the edge of the valley. She is being held there, forced to use her gifts for their benefit. This cannot stand. We will retrieve her and punish those who dared to kidnap an orc shaman. We will send a message that such acts will not be tolerated. No, this was wrong. Grusha wanted to leap from her hiding place, to shout the truth, but she forced herself to remain still. If she revealed herself now, she would be dragged back to the clan, and the war party would still attack Cade's farm. She needed a different plan. The gathering continued, with various clan leaders pledging warriors to the rescue mission. They planned to strike at dawn, 2 days hence, giving themselves time to prepare and to approach under cover of darkness. Grusha listened to it all, her mind racing, and then slipped away as silently as she had come. She ran back to the farm, arriving just as the first rays of sun broke over the horizon. Cade was pacing in the yard and he spun at the sound of her approach, relief flooding his face. Thank the gods, what did you learn? They are coming. My mother has convinced the clans that I have been kidnapped, that you are holding me prisoner. They plan to attack at dawn tomorrow to rescue me and punish you. Grusha grabbed his shoulders, her grip tight. We have to leave, now. Take Thomas and go. I will return to the clans, tell them the truth, try to stop the attack. If you go back there, they will never let you leave again. Your mother will make sure of it. Cade's jaw was set, his eyes hard. We will not run. This is my land, my home. I will not be driven from it by lies. Then you will die. Cade, there are hundreds of them. You are one man. You cannot fight those odds. Then help me even them. Grusha stared at him, not understanding. What do you mean? You are a shaman. You have power, magic. Can you not call spirits to aid us, create defenses, something? I am one shaman. The magic you are speaking of requires days of preparation, multiple shamans working in concert. I cannot. You performed a ritual no clan would allow to save Thomas. You bound your life to a dying human child because it was right, even knowing it could get you killed. Do not tell me you cannot do this. Cade's voice softened. I am not asking you to slaughter your people, Grusha. I am asking you to protect ours, this farm, our family. Please. Our family. The words settled into Grusha's chest, warm and terrible and true. This was her family now. This farm was her home, and she would defend it with everything she had. All right, she said. All right. We have 1 day to prepare. We will need materials, and I will need Thomas's help if he has the courage. I have courage, Thomas said from the doorway, where he had apparently been listening. His young face was pale, but determined. Tell me what to do. They spent the day in frantic preparation. Grusha taught Thomas a simple ward, a barrier of spiritual energy that would hold against physical attack for a limited time. It was basic magic, the kind taught to young shamans to protect themselves during vision quests. But with Thomas's natural sensitivity and her guidance, they were able to anchor it to the 4 corners of the farm, creating a protective boundary. While Thomas worked on maintaining the wards, Grusha prepared more active defenses. She could not kill, would not kill her own people, but she could hamper, confuse, redirect. She mixed potions that would cause temporary blindness, created smoke bombs that would obscure vision and choke lungs without permanent damage, planted spirit traps that would induce fear and disorientation. It was not enough to stop a determined war party, but it might slow them down, might give her time to make them listen. Cade, for his part, prepared physical defenses. He boarded up the windows, reinforced the doors, stocked the house with water and food in case they were besieged. He cleaned and sharpened his hunting bow, prepared arrows. He moved with the efficiency of someone who had done this before, and Grusha remembered that he had been a soldier once, before he became a farmer. That history was evident now in the way he assessed angles and sight lines, in the calm focus that replaced his earlier fear. As night fell, they gathered in the kitchen, exhausted and anxious. Thomas had fallen asleep in his chair, worn out by the effort of maintaining the wards, and Cade carried him to bed with gentle hands. When he returned, he found Grusha standing at the window, staring out at the dark forest. "They will not listen to me," she said quietly. "Even if I go out there and tell them the truth, they will think I have been bewitched, coerced. My mother has already decided what happened. She will not let facts get in the way of her narrative." Then what do? We survive. We hold them off long enough for cooler heads to prevail. Surely not every orc in that war party believes my mother's story. Some will question, some will hesitate. We exploit that hesitation. Grusha turned to face him. "And if it comes to it, if they breach the defenses, you take Thomas and run. Get him to safety. I am not leaving you. You have to. For Thomas. Promise me, Cade. Promise me you will save him." Cade was silent for a long moment. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I promise. But it will not come to that. We will survive this. All of us. Together." She wanted to believe him, held on to that hope as they went to bed, as she lay in his arms listening to his heartbeat, memorizing the feel of him in case this was their last night. At some point, she must have slept, because she woke to the sound of war cries in the pre-dawn darkness. They were here. Grusha was on her feet instantly, pulling on her clothes, grabbing her supplies. Cade was already moving, securing the final boards on the windows, checking his weapons. Thomas appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide but his small face set with determination. "The wards are holding," he reported, "but they are testing them, pushing. Good boy. Keep them up as long as you can. When you feel them start to crack, tell me immediately." Grusha moved to the front window, peering through a gap in the boards. She could see torches moving in the darkness, dozens of them, and she heard her mother's voice calling out. "Grusha, we know you are in there. Come out and no harm will come to the humans. This does not have to end in bloodshed." Grusha took a deep breath and opened the door, stepping out onto the porch. The wards shimmered around her, invisible to orc eyes, but she could feel them, a gentle pressure against her skin. The war party stopped their advance, staring at her in shock. I am here, mother, Grusha called, and I am not a prisoner. I am here by choice. Raska pushed through the crowd, her face twisted in confusion and rage. What poison have they fed you? What spell have they worked? Daughter, come away from there. Come home. I am home. Grusha gestured to the farmhouse behind her, to Cade, who had appeared in the doorway, his bow ready but not drawn. This is where I choose to be. These are my people now. You would forsake your clan, your blood, for humans? Raska spat the last word like a curse. I would choose love over hate, peace over war. I am tired, mother, tired of the fighting, the prejudice, the endless cycle of violence. This human showed me kindness when he had every reason to fear me. He trusted me with his son's life. He has given me a home. Why should I turn my back on that? Because you are Orc, Raska roared. Because we are your people. Are you? You beat me when I showed compassion. You called me weak for wanting to heal rather than harm. You would have let a child die because he was born to the wrong species. What kind of people are you? Grusha felt tears on her cheeks, but did not wipe them away. I performed the ritual, mother. The one grandmother taught me, the one that binds life to life. I saved Thomas because it was right, and I would do it again. That is who I am. If you cannot accept that, then perhaps I was never truly one of you. Silence fell over the gathering, orcs looking at each other uncertainly. Raska seemed to be struggling for words, her fists clenched at her sides, and then another voice spoke up, old and creaking but full of authority. She speaks truth. An ancient orc pushed through the crowd, leaning heavily on a gnarled staff. Grusha's heart leaped. It was Vorgash, the eldest shaman of the northern clans, a legend among their people. She had thought him long dead. Vorgash, Raska hissed, this does not concern you. It concerns all shamans when one of our own is persecuted for following the true path. Vorgash moved to stand between Raska and Grusha, his milky eyes somehow still seeing. I knew your grandmother, child. She would be proud of what you have done. The ritual of binding is sacred, meant to be used when all other options have failed, when the preservation of life itself hangs in the balance. You performed it correctly, at great risk to yourself, for a child you had no obligation to save. That is the mark of a true shaman. She bound herself to a human, Raska protested. She has polluted her magic, tainted her bloodline. She has expanded her compassion beyond the narrow confines of clan. That is evolution, not pollution. Vorgash turned his clouded gaze on the assembled orcs. I am old. I have lived through 3 wars with the humans, have seen countless orcs and humans die for nothing more than mutual fear and misunderstanding. And I am tired of it. If this young shaman has found a way to bridge that divide, to build something new, then I say we should honor her courage, not condemn it. Murmurs ran through the crowd, some agreeing, some still angry, all uncertain. Raska looked around, seeing her support crumbling, and her face hardened. Fine. Let her stay with her human pets. But she is no daughter of mine, no clan member. She is cast out, exiled. If she or her humans ever set foot in our territories, they will be killed on sight. Mother. You made your choice, Grusha. Now live with it. Raska turned and stalked away, and slowly the other orcs followed. Some cast sympathetic glances back at Grusha, but none spoke in her defense. Within minutes, the war party had melted back into the forest, leaving only Vorgash standing in the clearing. The old shaman approached the ward line, and Grusha let it drop, allowing him to climb the porch steps. Up close, she could see how frail he had become. His green skin faded to a sickly gray, his once powerful frame bent and shrunken. But his eyes, clouded though they were, still held fierce intelligence. You have chosen a hard path, young one, he said gently. I know, but it is my path. Grusha gestured to Cade, who had lowered his bow but still watched warily. This is Cade Anderson and his son Thomas, my family. Vorgash studied them both, then nodded slowly. I see strength in them. Courage. You have chosen well. He reached into his robe and pulled out a small leather pouch, pressing it into Grusha's hands. Herbs from my own garden, for your work. You will need to be both shaman and healer now, for orcs and humans alike who are brave enough to seek your aid. It will not be easy, but I believe you are equal to the task. Thank you, Vorgash. Your support means everything. I am dying, child. The sickness in my lungs that no magic can cure. I have perhaps one more season, maybe two. When I am gone, there will be no one left who remembers the old ways, the true purpose of shamanic power. Except you. He placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. Carry it forward. Teach your human son, if he has the gift. Build something new from the ashes of the old. That is my charge to you. Grusha felt tears spill over, and she embraced the old orc carefully, mindful of his fragility. I will. I swear it. Vorgash left as the sun rose, his figure disappearing into the forest like a ghost. Grusha stood on the porch watching until he was gone, then turned to find Cade and Thomas standing behind her, their faces full of questions and relief and love. Is it over? Thomas asked. Yes, little one. It is over. We are safe now. And you are really staying? Forever? Forever. Grusha knelt and pulled Thomas into a hug, then looked up at Cade over the boy's head. If you will have me. Cade's smile was answer enough, but he said it anyway. Always. The seasons turned, autumn giving way to winter, winter melting into spring. Grusha settled into her new life with a completeness that still sometimes surprised her. She tended the farm alongside Cade, learning the rhythms of planting and harvest, the quirks of their animals, the 100 small tasks that kept a homestead running. She continued her shamanic work, treating injuries and illnesses not just for their small family, but for the occasional brave soul from town who heard whispers of an orc healer in the hills and decided to risk the journey. Thomas grew like a weed, his gift for spirit sight developing rapidly under Grusha's tutelage. By the time he turned 9, he could communicate with the farm animals in a way that went beyond simple training, understanding their needs and moods with uncanny accuracy. He still had nightmares sometimes, remnants of his brush with death, but they grew less frequent as time passed, replaced by dreams of a future where orcs and humans worked together, built together, lived together without fear. Cade thrived as well, the loneliness that had haunted him for so long fading away. He laughed more, smiled more, sang while he worked. In the evenings, after Thomas was in bed, he would pull Grusha into his arms, and they would sit by the fire, talking or simply existing together in comfortable silence. They never formally married, knowing that no human priest would perform the ceremony, and no Orc Shaman would bless it. But they made their own vows one spring night under the stars, promising to love and protect each other for as long as they both lived. Word of them spread slowly, carefully. Some humans were appalled, calling Cade a traitor and worse. Some orcs still viewed Grusha as exiled, tainted, but others, a small but growing number, saw them as a symbol of possibility, proof that the old hatreds did not have to define the future. A few humans made the journey to the farm seeking healing or wisdom. A few orcs came as well, outcasts and questioners who no longer fit within the rigid structure of clan life. Grusha welcomed them all, offering what help she could, and if some of those orcs chose to settle nearby, building their own homesteads in the unclaimed lands around Cade's farm, well, that was their choice. By the time 2 years had passed, there was a small community forming, a handful of families both orc and human who were willing to try something new. It was not perfect. There were misunderstandings, conflicts, moments when old prejudices flared up and threatened to tear apart the fragile peace they were building. But they worked through it, together, finding compromises and solutions that honored both cultures without forcing either to abandon what they were. On a warm summer evening, as Grusha stood in the garden harvesting tomatoes with Thomas chattering beside her about a family of rabbits he had befriended in the far field, she felt a presence at the edge of her awareness. She turned to see a shimmering figure standing at the tree line, translucent and fading. Vorgash. She knew without being told that he had passed, that this was his spirit come to say goodbye. Thomas saw him too, falling silent, and together they watched as the old shaman raised one hand in farewell. Grusha pressed her own hand to her heart, then extended it toward him, a gesture of respect and gratitude. Vorgash smiled, and then he was gone, released into whatever lay beyond the mortal world. He was a good orc, Thomas said quietly. He was a great shaman and a better friend than I deserved. Grusha wiped at her eyes, then smiled down at Thomas. But he would not want us to mourn him. He lived a full life and died knowing his work would continue. That is all any of us can hope for. They returned to the house to find Cade preparing dinner, and Grusha moved to help him, falling into the easy partnership they had developed. As they cooked and ate and cleaned up together, as they put Thomas to bed and retired to their own room, as they made love with the tender familiarity of long practice, Grusha reflected on how far she had come from that desperate day when she had heard a scream from a farmhouse and made the choice to answer it. She had lost her clan, her mother's love, the respect of most of her people. But she had gained so much more, a family who loved her not for her power or her abilities, but simply for who she was. A purpose that went beyond the narrow confines of clan politics, a home where she was not just accepted, but cherished. And perhaps most importantly, she had gained hope. Hope that the future could be different from the past. Hope that the walls between species could come down, one person, one choice, one act of courage at a time. Years continued to pass, and the small community around the farm grew into a proper settlement with its own name, Greenridge, chosen for the line of forested hills that marked its eastern boundary. They built a meeting hall where both orcs and humans gathered to settle disputes and make decisions together. They established trade routes with nearby towns, though not without difficulty and suspicion from those who still clung to old hatreds. Thomas reached his 15th year, tall and strong and kind, his gift for spirit work having blossomed into true shamanic power under Grusha's patient teaching. He could speak with animals as easily as with people, could sense illness in plants and livestock before physical symptoms appeared, could walk the boundaries between the mortal world and the spirit realm with the confidence of someone twice his age. Grusha was proud of him and told him so often, though he always blushed and insisted he was merely a good student. Cade aged more visibly than either Grusha or Thomas, his dark hair graying at the temples, lines appearing around his eyes and mouth, but he wore the years well. He was respected in Greenridge, not just as Grusha's partner, but as a leader in his own right, someone who could bridge the gap between human and orc perspectives, who could mediate disputes with patience and fairness. The farm had expanded over the years with help from neighbors both orc and human, and it provided not just for their family, but for the community as a whole. On a crisp autumn afternoon, as Grusha was teaching a class of mixed orc and human children about medicinal herbs in the newly built schoolhouse, a rider came thundering into town. He was human, young and clearly terrified, and he nearly fell off his horse in his haste to dismount. "We need help," he gasped, addressing the crowd that quickly gathered. "The next valley over, there has been an outbreak. People are dying. Our healer is dead, one of the first to fall. We heard there is a shaman here, an orc who treats humans. Please, we can pay." "Hush." Grusha had pushed through the crowd, Thomas at her side. "I will come. Thomas, gather the medical supplies, the full kit. We may be gone for weeks." "I will come as well," Cade said, appearing from the fields where he had been working. "You may need extra hands and someone to watch your back." The ride to the neighboring valley took the better part of a day, and what they found when they arrived chilled Grusha's blood. The sickness had struck fast and hard, a fever that turned into bloody flux, killing within days of the first symptoms. The dead were being burned in pyres outside the village, and the living huddled in their homes, too afraid to come out. Grusha set up a healing station in the village hall, the largest building available, and began the grim work of triage. The sickness was virulent, but she recognized it, had treated similar outbreaks in orc camps over the years. It required aggressive intervention, herbs to purge the system and reduce fever, constant hydration, spiritual work to strengthen the patient's will to live. She worked for days without stopping, barely sleeping, sustained by Thomas's assistance and Cade's steady presence. They saved more than half of those infected, a better outcome than the village had dared hope for. And when the crisis finally passed and the last patient was declared out of danger, the villagers gathered to thank them. "You are an orc," the village elder said, stating the obvious. "We were taught to fear your kind, to see you as monsters. But you came when we called, risked your own life to save ours. We will not forget this." "I am a shaman," Grusha corrected gently. "It is my calling to preserve life, regardless of whose life it is. I am glad I could help." As they rode back to Greenridge, Grusha felt a shift in the air, something fundamental changing. The story of the Orc Shaman who saved a human village would spread. It would reach other communities, other orcs, other humans. Some would dismiss it, but some would listen. Some would begin to question the old hatreds, the old divisions. It was a small step, perhaps. But small steps, taken consistently, could cover vast distances. Back home, Grusha collapsed into bed beside Cade, exhaustion pulling her down into deep sleep. She woke to find him watching her, his hand tracing the curve of her jaw, her tusks, her pointed ear. "What are you thinking?" she murmured. "That I am the luckiest man alive, that the day you walked through my door was the day my real life began, that I love you more than I thought possible to love anyone." Cade leaned down and kissed her softly. "Thank you for staying, for choosing us. Thank you for giving me a reason to stay." Grusha pulled him down beside her, wrapping herself around him. "I love you too. You and Thomas. My family." They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, listening to the sounds of their home, the small creaks and settling noises that meant safety and permanence. Outside, the world continued to turn, continued to struggle with old wounds and new possibilities. But here, in this room, in this house, in this community they had built together, there was peace. And peace, Grusha had learned, was worth fighting for. Thomas came of age during the spring of his 18th year, and Greenridge threw a celebration that lasted 3 days, orcs and humans feasting and dancing together with a comfort that would have seemed impossible a decade earlier. Grusha watched her adopted son, now taller than his father and broad through the shoulders, laughing with friends of both species, and felt a fierce pride mixed with bittersweetness. He was becoming his own person, would soon want his own life, his own path, as it should be. "He will make a fine shaman," Vorgash's successor, a younger orc named Kelda, who had taken up the mantle after the old one's death, said from beside Grusha. "Perhaps even finer than you, no offense intended." "None taken. I hope he surpasses me. That's the whole point of teaching, is it not? To raise up those who will go further than we could." Grusha accepted a cup of ale from a passing human, toasting with Kelda. "What news from the clans? Do they still speak of me with scorn?" "Some do. But others have begun to reconsider. The story of the human village you saved has reached even the most remote camps. And there are more mixed communities forming, small ones, tentative. You and Cade started something, Grusha. A movement, perhaps. It will outlive us all. I hope so. I hope the children growing up now, like Thomas, never know the hatred we were raised with, that they see each other as individuals, not as categories." Grusha watched as Thomas pulled a young orc woman into a dance, both of them laughing. "Do you think that is possible? True peace between our peoples?" "I think we are building it one day at a time. Will we see it completed in our lifetimes? Probably not, but our children might, or their children. That is legacy enough." Kelda raised her cup. "To the future, then. May it be kinder than the past." To the future. The years continued their steady march, bringing changes and challenges and joys. Thomas eventually left Greenridge to study with shamans in distant orc clans, his mixed heritage and unique perspective making him a valuable bridge between cultures. He wrote regularly, long letters detailing his adventures and the people he met, the prejudices he encountered, and slowly dismantled. Grusha kept every letter, reading them aloud to Cade on quiet evenings. Cade himself began to slow, his joints aching in cold weather, his breath coming shorter when he worked the fields. He insisted he was fine, that he had many years left, but Grusha could read the signs. Humans lived shorter lives than orcs, and Cade was approaching his 50th year, still vigorous, still vital, but undeniably aging. She held him closer at night, memorizing the feel of him, knowing that their time together, though rich, was limited. It made her treasure each day more, find joy in small moments, the way he still smiled when she entered a room, the way his hand automatically reached for hers when they walked, the way he said her name like a prayer. On the day of their 15th anniversary, marked by the date they had made their private vows under the stars, Cade surprised her with a gift. It was a wooden carving, painstakingly detailed, of two figures standing together, one clearly orc and one human, their hands clasped. Behind them, a smaller figure, a child looking toward the horizon. "Our family," Cade said simply, as Grusha turned the carving over in her hands, tears streaming down her face. I wanted you to have something to remember this by. When I am gone and you continue on, as you will for many more years, I want you to remember that this was real, that we built something beautiful together. How can I forget? You and Thomas are my heart. Even when you pass beyond my reach, you will be with me. Grusha set the carving down carefully and threw her arms around him, holding tight. I was so alone before I found you, so lost. You gave me purpose, belonging, love. You gave me everything. Then we are even, because you gave me the same. They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity and the urgency of people who know their time is precious. And afterward, as they lay tangled together, Grusha made a silent promise to whatever spirits might be listening. She would live fully, love deeply, honor the gift she had been given. And when Cade's time came, as it inevitably would, she would grieve but not break. She would carry on, would continue their work, would make sure that the legacy they built together endured. But that day was still far in the future. For now, they had each other, had their community, had the life they had built against all odds, and that was enough. That was everything. Thomas returned to Greenridge 5 years later, bringing with him a wife, a fierce orc woman named Vashka, who shared his vision of a world where species mattered less than character. They settled on the outskirts of the village, building a house with their own hands, and within a year, Grusha became a grandmother to a squalling, green-skinned baby boy they named Cade in honor of his grandfather. Holding that child for the first time, feeling his tiny hand grip her finger with surprising strength, Grusha felt something in her soul settle into place. This was the future she'd been building toward, the reason for every sacrifice, every hard choice. This child would grow up in a world where his mixed heritage was not a curse, but a gift, where he could move freely between orc and human communities, where his potential was limited only by his own ambition and talent. Cade, the elder, was slowing more now, spending more time in a chair by the fire than in the fields, but he doted on his grandson with a devotion that was beautiful to witness. Grusha often found them together, the old man telling stories while the baby burbled and waved his small fists, and she would pause in her work to simply watch, committing the scene to memory. In the 20th year, after Grusha had first walked through Cade's door, on a soft spring morning filled with birdsong and the scent of blooming flowers, Cade Anderson passed peacefully in his sleep, Grusha's hand in his. She felt him go, felt the exact moment his spirit slipped free of his body, and though her grief was a physical ache, sharp and terrible, there was also a strange peace. He had lived a good life. He had known love and family. He had changed the world in small but meaningful ways. That was no small legacy. They buried him on the hill behind the farmhouse, overlooking the fields he had worked for so many years. The entire community turned out for the funeral, orcs and humans standing together, sharing stories and tears and comfort. Thomas spoke, his voice strong despite his grief, talking about the man who had raised him, who had taught him that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Grusha could not speak, her throat too tight, but she stood beside her son and let the community wrap around them both in support. In the days that followed, she found herself talking to Cade as though he could still hear her, updating him on the daily happenings, asking his opinion on decisions she had to make. Foolish, perhaps, but it brought comfort. And sometimes, on still evenings when the veil between worlds grew thin, she thought she felt him there, a warm presence at her shoulder, watching over their family still. Life continued, as it always did. The seasons turned. Young Cade grew into a bright, curious toddler. Greenridge expanded, becoming a true town with its own charter and elected council that included both orc and human representatives. More mixed communities formed in the surrounding regions, looking to Greenridge as a model. The old hatreds did not disappear, not completely, but they loosened their grip on the younger generations. Grusha continued her work as healer and shaman, training new students who showed the gift, regardless of their species. She was older now, her green skin beginning to show the first signs of age, her dark hair streaked with silver, but her power had not diminished. If anything, it had grown deeper, more nuanced, refined by decades of practice and experience. On the 30th anniversary of the day she had saved Thomas, Grusha stood in the same spot where she had performed that forbidden ritual, now a garden lovingly tended by Thomas and Vashka. They had placed a stone marker there, carved with the symbol of life binding to life, a memorial to the choice that had changed everything. Thomas found her there, his own children, 3 now, playing nearby under Vashka's watchful eye. He was in his 30s now, a respected shaman in his own right, his hair still dark but his face showing the first lines of age and wisdom. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly, standing beside her. "Everything you gave up to save me?" Grusha smiled, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "Not for a single moment. You gave me a family, a purpose, a home. You gave me everything I did not know I needed. How could I regret that? I do not remember much from when I was sick, just fragments, feelings. But I remember you. I remember thinking an angel had come to save me, though you looked nothing like the angels in the church paintings." Thomas laughed softly. "When I got older and understood what you had risked, the ritual you performed, the exile you accepted, I did not know how to process it. Why would someone do that for a stranger?" "Because you were not a stranger, not really. You were a child in need, and I was someone who could help. The rest, the complications of species and clan and politics, those were just noise. In that moment, the only thing that mattered was saving your life." Grusha looked at the stone marker. "Kurti." At the symbol her grandmother had taught her so many years ago. And I'm glad I did. Look at what came from it. Your family. This community. The hope that someday our peoples might truly live in peace. That's worth any price. "I will make sure they know," Thomas said. "Your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren when they come. I will make sure they know the story, how you performed a ritual no clan would allow to save a dying farmer's son, how that choice changed the world. It was not just my choice, it was your father's too, trusting an orc in his darkest hour. It was yours, fighting off that boar, even though you were just a child. It was the community's, choosing to build something new rather than cling to old hatreds. We did this together." Grusha pulled Thomas into a hug, marveling at how tall he had grown, how strong. "But yes, tell them. Tell them that love is stronger than fear, that courage comes in many forms, that the future is not written in stone, but shaped by the choices we make each day. Tell them that. I will. I promise." They stood together in the garden as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The children's laughter rang out, a sound full of innocence and joy, and Grusha closed her eyes, breathing in the moment, storing it away with all the other precious memories she had collected over the years. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the sound of drums, the deep rhythmic beat of orc gatherings. But it was not a war drum this time, not a call to violence. It was a celebration, another community marking the summer solstice with mixed orc and human families, coming together to honor the turning of the seasons. Progress. Slow, halting, imperfect, but undeniable. Grusha smiled, feeling the presence of those she had lost, Cade, Vorgash, her grandmother, all the people who had shaped her path and made this moment possible. They were gone, but their influence remained, woven into the fabric of everything she had built, and she was content. Years later, when Grusha's own time finally came, when she lay in the bed she had shared with Cade and felt her spirit preparing to slip free, she was surrounded by family. Thomas and Vashka, their children and grandchildren, a whole clan of her own making, mixed blood and pure orc and human and everything in between. They held her hands, told her stories, sang her the songs of both her peoples. And as she drifted away, crossing that final threshold, the last thing she heard was young Cade, now a shaman in his own right, beginning to tell the story of his great-grandmother. The Orc Shaman, who performed a ritual no clan would allow to save a farmer's dying son, and in doing so, saved them all. The story would continue, the work would continue, the dream of peace and understanding would continue, carried forward by the generations she had touched, taught, loved. That was her true legacy. Not power or recognition or the approval of her clan, but the simple act of choosing compassion over fear again and again until it became the foundation of something larger than herself. And in the end, What more could any life hope to achieve? The story of Grusha and Cade became legend in the years that followed, told around fires both orc and human, embellished and refined until it took on the quality of myth. But at its heart remained a simple truth, that a single act of courage, one person choosing to reach across the divide of species and tradition to save a life, could ripple outward in ways impossible to predict, touching countless lives and shaping the future itself. In Greenridge, now a bustling town of several thousand residents, they erected a statue in the central square. It depicted an orc woman and a human man standing together, hands clasped, with a child between them looking toward the horizon. At the base was an inscription, words that Thomas had written and the town council had approved unanimously. Here stood Grusha the Shaman and Cade Anderson, who proved that courage comes in many forms. May we all have the strength to choose compassion over fear, love over hatred, and hope over despair. May their example light our path forward into a future we build together. And every year, on the anniversary of that first ritual, the town gathered to tell the story anew, to remember, to honor, and to recommit themselves to the vision of a world where the old divisions mattered less than the common bonds of decency, kindness, and shared humanity. It was a vision still being built, still imperfect, still challenged by those who clung to the old ways, but it endured, growing stronger with each generation, until the day came when a child, seeing the statue for the first time, asked their parent not, "Why is one an orc and one a human?" but simply, "Who were they?" And the parent smiled, remembering the stories their own parents had told them, and began, "They were heroes. Let me tell you their story." The work continued, the dream endured, and in the space where two impossible people had chosen to build something beautiful against all odds, love remained constant and undiminished, a testament to what could be achieved when hearts were brave enough to try.